And welcome into the Extra Point Show presented to you by Fantasy Points. Week 14 on the horizon here. We are inching closer and closer in the fantasy world to the fantasy playoffs, as in most leagues. It starts next week, but today we're talking some player prop bets here on the show with my guy, Major. Major, how are things rolling, man?
Doing good, man. Let's make some money, dude. I feel like this is gonna be a good week, man. I feel like the season's already coming to an end. Let's go out with a bang.
Absolutely. And you know what? This sort of show is good for the people that unfortunately might not have made their fantasy football playoffs. And they're like, man,
True.
it's not as exciting watching games. My team, it doesn't matter if I win or lose, but you can win some money, right? I feel like that's always like the icing on the cake there.
Absolutely, man. That's a great point. If you're struggling in your fantasy leagues, go ahead and get some player props on Underdog.
Yeah, and maybe you're on the opposite end too, and you already locked in that first round bye this week. Doesn't matter much, and now you can just win some extra money. Hopefully, at the end of the season, you win the fantasy money. But we're talking player props here on the Underdog Fantasy app. If you are not familiar, super easy to find that, super easy app to utilize. You can go to your web browser and type in Underdog Fantasy, or go to the App Store, download the app. How it works for this show is we're talking player props. So if you click on the Pick'em section in Underdog, you'll see a bunch of players playing today and different statistics for that player. And they'll say higher or lower for specific stats. You select at least two guys from two different teams, put your money down, and you can win some cash. So super fun to play, easy to utilize. If you're new, be sure to use the promo code Fantasy Points, Fantasy PTS for a deposit matchup up to $100. So good incentive to throw in $10 and be able to play with 20. So Major and I, every week, we talk through about 4 picks each. We're 100% hit rate, I think, or close to it, or not close. We'll,
Wow.
we'll see. But
Yeah.
Major, what are you liking today? What's your first pick here?
I'm gonna go with somebody that I obviously don't talk about that much. I'm surprised I don't, being a running back guy, but I'm gonna go with Tony Pollard higher than 70.5 rushing yards. Since week since the bye in week 9, Pollard has beat this mark 3 out of 4 times. He's averaging 86.5 yards per game. I mean, that's the average, just under 86.5 per game. With last week going for 91 yards and 2 TDs, he's coming off a pretty good game. He's facing uh the Texans, so he has a perfect opportunity to beat this mark again. Um, the Texans are the weakest defense in the league. They're giving up 169 yards per contest. Yes, I'm gonna go all in on Tony Pollard this week.
I'm with you because of two things, man. The matchup is just so juicy. It's the best fantasy matchup for running backs, so usually that translates well to the stats and the player props. And then number two, him and Zeke are coexisting very well together right now for the last 3 weeks. If we look at the last 4 games that these guys have played, Zeke only played in 3 of them, but they've combined for 9 touchdowns. And Pollard's been the one on fire. Zeke's been pretty decent, actually, but Pollard's been the one on fire. 3 out of 4 of his last games, he's carried the ball for over 5 yards per carry. And it's not like he's only carrying the ball like 5 to 6 times a game. He's had games of 18 and 22 carries. So he's on fire. You got to roll with the guy who has the hot hand in the hot matchup. So I really like that one there.
Yeah, he's like sharing the rock too. So,
Yeah.
the last 4 weeks he's had 54%, 59% and 43%. So it's pretty much a 50-50 split between him and Zeke.
Yep. And I'll start off with my first one. Another guy, we said Tony Pollard's been hot. This guy's been red hot the last 2 weeks, but I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson higher than 62.5 receiving yards. So sometimes I like to look at, again, a fantasy lens and relate it to a DFS or player prop lens. But the only somewhat fantasy friendly position against the Bills this year is the wide receiver position. They allow the 13th most fantasy points per game. Uh, Again, doesn't always relate to DFS, but it can. It just kind of shows that they might be a great defense, but this position is somewhat successful. But Garrett Wilson has scored over 24 fantasy points 3 times this season, so he's had 3 big games: one with Joe Flacco, and then 2 back-to-back weeks with Mike White. 8 and 15 targets the last 2 games, resulting in 95 and 162 receiving yards. He scored 2 touchdowns week 12. So it's safe to say that Mike White plus Garrett Wilson has been a good thing, and that'll need to be an emphasis against a really, really tough Buffalo Bills team. So, guy's been on fire. The receiving yards have been great. I'm going to go higher than 62.5 receiving yards. What do you think on that one?
No, I'm with you. He's been killing it the last 2 weeks, like, 95 yards and another one with 162 yards. Um, Mike White seems to just be throwing the ball all over the yard, so I think he's gonna have plenty of opportunity to surpass that mark.
You know what's interesting too about Mike White is that they in the games he's played the last two seasons, like last year, 44 and 45 attempts in two of
Mhm.
his games. This year, he's coming off of a game he threw the ball 57 times. Like they are
Right.
letting this guy just air it out. Like do what you got to do, Mike. Like they have some trust in him throwing the ball.
Why they didn't allow, Zach to throw it like 100 times a game? What's going on here?
I think there was an issue with him throwing to the wrong team or to the ground sometimes. So they had to say, "Hey, you know what? We got to limit this guy. He's seeing things differently." So,
Great point, great
yeah.
point.
What what do you like here for your second underdog fantasy pick today?
So for my second one, I'm gonna go with Daniel Jones, lower than 234 and a half total yards. Um, Jones will have a tough task against the league's best defense, a pass defense in the Eagles that only allows just under 178 yards per game. Daniel has only topped this mark once this season. I had to look at that like 2 or 3 times because I was like, man, this guy, you look at him, you think he's going to have those yards, but the passing yards is kind of holding him back a little bit. Um, but he did have 300 and 341 yards against Detroit in week 11. So, the passing, he showed he can do it, but again, I don't think they allow him to throw the ball enough to really achieve that. But again, he is good on the ground as well. Not to mention Jones will be lining up Darius Slayton, Richie James, and Isaiah Hodgins at wideout. So that's nothing to really like write home about. He's not those receivers not scaring anybody. So look for Daniel Jones to run a little bit. If he does get close to this mark, I think it's gonna be with his legs. So I'm gonna go under.
Yeah, the Eagles, Ben in the background here, I'm sure likes to hear good things about the Eagles and you saying they're going to shut down Daniel Jones, but they've been a really tough defense this year, as you've noted. Only two teams have allowed under 300 yards per game, total yards per game, and that's San Fran and Philly. So both under 300, 296.4. So that kind of just paints the picture that they're kind of, even if it's by a couple total yards there, they're in their own bracket right there, in terms of a defense that's tougher. And he did run a lot last game, Daniel Jones, but I'm sure that's part of the game plan. He's also seen games of kind of iffy passing attempts, meaning like they're not just saying, "Hey,
Right.
Daniel Jones, you need to win us this game." And to the wide receiver core, it's kind of nasty. I love what Darius Slayton's been doing, and the receiving yard upside he has, but at the same time, like when that's your primary guy right now, that kind of says a lot.
Right. Yeah. So it's gonna be rough for him. Like I say, he's got to do it with his legs if he's gonna do it at all.
Yeah, I agree with that one. My next one, Isaiah McKenzie. I'm going to go higher than 3 receptions. So it feels like a roller coaster of a usage data set for McKenzie this season. He's had 5 appearances over 5 targets or 5 or more targets, but he's also had 6 games under 5 targets. The trend the last game or the last 2 games has been more in his favor. 15 targets the last 2 weeks with 11 catches. He scored and had 96 yards week 12. The Jets is a rough secondary. And although you can't, count out the Buffalo offense beating up a good defense, you still have to think that there's the chance that Sauce and those guys maybe take away some of the bigger plays for Buffalo. I'll never count out Stephon Diggs, and Gabe Davis will have his random, big catch, but it might be a tougher team to push the ball further down the field on. So that to me makes me think about McKenzie, who's been more involved in that slot role. And he ranks 89th for wide receivers in his average depth of target, which is only 6.9. So he's more of that shorter range option. He's being utilized a bit more. We know that Josh Allen in the past has heavily utilized his slot wide receiver in Cole Beasley. He had a bunch of seasons with Josh Allen where he was getting some high volume. So the one asterisk here is that the only pass catcher who has been consistent all year has been Stephon Diggs. Gabe Davis hasn't been. Isaiah McKenzie hasn't been. Nobody else, Dawson Knox, nobody else has been super consistent, but he's trending up. And I feel like that underneath pass might be on versus the Jets today versus like airing it out on them.
Yeah, I'm looking at Gabe Davis targets, and it's pretty even when Isaiah. You think Isaiah, when you first hear, you think he's the wide receiver 3, but he's kind of like the wide receiver 2, like you said, in that slot. Quarterbacks typically like to, throw to the slot and throw to tight end. So a 3 sounds low. So I'm with you on that. That sounds like one of those gimme bets. I think that'd be a nice right now. Thanks, Underdog.
Yeah. Sometimes though, they seem low, and then we look at the stat line: 3
Get
catches
tricky.
for 60 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it looks good, but it wasn't good for the bet.
Exactly.
What's your next one, man?
I'm gonna go with Dameon Pierce higher than 65.5 rushing yards. The Texans will be without starting receivers Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins due to calf injury and a foot injury, making this a perfect opportunity for the Texans to focus on that running game with Pierce. Dame is coming off a pretty solid game last week when he ran for 73 yards versus Cleveland. Pierce faces the Cowboys rush defense that's ranked towards the bottom of the league. They allow 130 yards per game. So let's see what Damian got. He'll give you a game every now and then. So I think this is one of those weeks he's gonna achieve that.
I think one of the things you can probably count on at the end of the day is him touching the ball a ton in this game. And it
Right.
got a little iffy, weeks 11 and 12. He had 13 touches. I'm sorry. No, that was 12 touches. And then he had 8 the next week. But last week it got back up. He carried the ball 18 times, like you said. But I think you can count on him touching the ball a ton. And the other thing I'm going to say is, for DFS fantasy football, I'm smashing that Dallas defense and special teams if you play in DFS, because although I think Pierce will touch the ball a lot, who are they going to throw that ball to? I mean, who's left? Chris Moore, is Dorsett healthy? Brevin Jordan's been a disappointment. Akins, I guess, is trending up. Who are they going to throw the ball to?
Anyway, Philip Dorsett, I think, is the one right now.
That's wild. That's
and
wild.
Amari Rogers, I think, are the 2 guys that's left standing.
They just transitioned too. They like took the ball away from Davis Mills, gave it to Kyle Allen, took the ball back away from Kyle Allen, gave it back to Davis Mills, who's starting today. So Houston's been a little bit of a train wreck over there. It's crazy.
Yeah, I would keep an eye on Brevin Jordan though. He might take us opportunity with those receivers being out. The tight end might perform like last year. He kind of came on towards the end of the year. He may be able to do that this year as well.
Yeah, he was a sleeper whiff so far for me, because I thought coming into the season, I remember this stat. It was like 50% of his games played, he was a top 12 tight end. And I'm like, they need somebody to catch the ball, Brevin Jordan, but he hasn't done much. I think Akins has been like better the last few weeks, but I don't know. It's rough, man.
Yeah, it's rough all the way around that offense.
Enough said. Cleveland beat them up big time last week. They didn't need their offense to really do much when their defense was beating them up. But next one here, I'm going to go Kirk Cousins lower than 285.5 total yards. So total yards. We can point to all the reasons. We can list out all the stats about why Detroit is a plus matchup. Digging into the yards that they give up, the points that get scored on them, the how fantasy friendly they are. But the total yards here versus the just passing yards doesn't mean a ton when it comes to Cousins. He's rushed for 8 total yards the last 3 games combined. He actually has 4 games this season of negative rushing yards. So I know you and I always talk about like those combination stats,
Right.
passing and running. And that's great for Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Lamar Jackson, maybe even Danny Dimes, who we talked about, but not for Kirk Cousins. It doesn't mean anything for Kirk Cousins, to be honest. But strictly looking at the passing numbers, then he's hit this 285.5 3 times this year. but he's been under it 9 times this year. In week 2, he had a decent day against Detroit, who he plays today, but he had 260 passing yards with a pair of touchdowns. So for the fantasy world, I think it's a great matchup. I think Kirk Cousins is actually a good play today. It's a favorable fantasy matchup for quarterbacks. I'm just betting against that he's going to hit like 300 yards today because although Detroit's pretty tough, he hasn't done it a ton. And I don't think it's going to be like completely necessary to get the job done for the Vikings today. But what's your thoughts there on Cousins?
Yeah, his Detroit. I don't know why I like Detroit defense. Or the team in general. I don't know why I like them, but uh, I see them on the rise a little bit. So maybe I'm just a little bit early on them. But their
Mhm.
defense is, like you said, they're pretty tough. They play well, and they're just around that like 300 mark. Total yards to quarterbacks. Um, so, I'm gonna go with you on this one, man. I like going with Nick, man. You know your stuff. So I'm gonna lean your way on this one. I'm
Hey, hey,
50-50, but I'm gonna lean your way.
this guy just gives me confidence when he says you will push back though. I know that you will push back sometimes. It's
Absolutely.
not always just handshakes and high fives. So I appreciate that. But so you got one more, right? One more.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Donovan Peoples-Jones, higher than 50.5 receiving yards.
I like it.
When I looked at this earlier, I was kind of going on the opposite side of this, but you know, Amari Cooper is having a hip issue and he's a game time decision right now. So keep an eye on that. But even if he does play, DPJ showed that he's actually capable of leading the team in receiving, and being a one B to Cooper's 1A. So I feel safe still going with that 50.5. And the Browns should loosen up the play calling a little bit. It was Deshaun's first game back. There's a lot going on. He was playing in Houston and all that. So I think there was some stuff going on there. But I think he should be a little more comfortable this week, and they should allow him to throw the ball. He only threw the ball 22 times last week for 12 completions, so it's hard for any receivers to get off on that. And he still had, I think, what is it, 44 yards about around there
Yeah.
last week. So this week, I think he should top that, being that he could end up being a wide receiver one.
I like that a lot, and I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is a big sleeper this week. Knowing Amari Cooper for one is banged up for two, we've seen it a bunch of times with Jacoby Brissett, and Brissett actually played pretty decent this season.
Right.
So it's not a knock on him, but we're not gonna we're not gonna say that Deshaun Watson's not an upgrade. I would think that he is an upgrade just looking at his resume of what he's done in the past, but Donovan Peoples-Jones averaging 53.1 per game. But if you look at the first couple weeks here, 2 out of 3 of his first games, he had 10 or less receiving yards. So he got on fire from weeks 4 on. I mean, from weeks 4 through 8, he was over 70 receiving yards in all but one of those games. I mean, this is a guy we've seen do it a bunch of times this season. So it's not like hey, Deshaun Watson's about to unlock his receiving yard upside. We've seen it this season. So his role is going to be important today. I think he's going to be that deeper threat for Watson this season. And we saw in the past guys like Will Fuller be that option for Deshaun Watson and be successful with the receiving yard upside. So I like Donovan Peoples-Jones, not just for your bet, but rest of the season in fantasy. I think he's a good flex play. So good
Yeah.
call there.
Just got an update for Amari Cooper. He said he just did the pregame to test out his hip. He ran a few routes, but didn't go full speed. So,
Interesting.
yeah, take that for what you will. But yeah, who you got for your last one?
On a side note, I feel like David Bell also is
Mm,
banged up right now too.
that's a good
I can
call.
click on that real quick, but I thought, oh no, he must have been available despite lack of practice. So they've been banged up over there. That's all I'm saying. But my last one here, and I'm gonna butcher the name, but maybe you know it better than I do. But Chigoziem Okonkwo, higher than 29.5 receiving yards. So this is the I believe rookie tight end for the Tennessee Titans.
I was like, "Who
So
is this?" I'm like, "Who you even talking about?" You're like digging deep in the crates
I
right now.
was, man. I was just there's a bunch of paperwork on the desk. I had like the spider webs on the wall, just trying to find like the right bet for this last one. But Austin Hooper is likely still listed as the starting tight end for the Titans. But Ryan Tannehill has been using Okonkwo as the field stretching option. Here are his yards per reception numbers the last 5 games to kind of paint the picture of what I'm talking about. This is yards per catch: 48, 41, 31, 11.7, and 17. So maybe it trended downhill a bit, but all of those numbers for a tight end are pretty decent, maybe outside of that 11-ish game. But, 3 games over 30 yards per catch. That just shows that he's that deeper option. But in these last 5 weeks, he's hit above this 29.5 receiving yard line in all of them. 3 were over 40 yards, and he's coming off of a game last week where he had 68 receiving yards. So what stands out to me is that his role seems to be growing. He's had 5 targets the last 2 weeks in a row now. He saw his highest snap percentage this past week with 58. No Treylon Burks this week either, so there is the potential for him to continue to see another 5 targets in this game. And with that sort of upside, I feel like 30 yards is light work for this guy right now. But Okonkwo looking deep here. What's your thoughts there?
I have no thoughts because I don't even know who this guy is. No, but him and Austin Hooper, I think they're gonna like you said, with the top receiver being out, I think they're gonna do a lot of 2 tight end sets and stuff like that. So he does have an opportunity there. I'm never that high on the Titans pass offense, but they're Tannehill, he'll give you a 300-yard game when you least expect it. So
Randomly.
I'm going to I'm gonna lean on you on this one because I have no idea who this is. Can't pronounce the dude's name, but hey, that's Nick just digging deep for no reason. There's so many players in the league, but you went there. Great job, buddy.
Yeah, I had to do something different here. I feel like you and I we do something a little different every week, and that was
Absolutely.
that was something there. But on a side note, Tennessee, no Treylon Burks. Obviously, Derrick Henry might see 28 carries in this one. Do you have any optimism for Robert Woods? Because I feel like the last couple of weeks he's seen decent targets. I think he's had 7 or 6 targets in the last few games. But, we've seen him in the past be a guy that can get 10 targets and have a 18-point fantasy day, but we haven't really seen it too much. Are you in on him maybe having a decent week, out on him? Any thoughts?
I'm always in on Robert Woods, man. That's one of my favorite players. Him being an LA native and a USC, alum,
Hmm.
but USC being one of my favorite college teams. But I mean, if he's the only option, like I said, Tannehill, he'll give you one of those good games, and sometimes it's when you least expect it. And if he's going to have that game this week, look for Woods to be the man to be the recipient of those targets.
There we go. There we go. Wise words from Major. But Major, anything else as we wrap this show up for week 14?
Nah, man, that's it. Let's make some money, dude. And it feels like the season's going so fast, man. Time is going fast right now. I don't know what's going on.
Wild, man. Wild, man. 14 weeks of football we're in right now. And you guys got to enjoy it while it lasts because you'll blink and then it's the off season again. And we're just thinking about what can happen for next year. So enjoy this Sunday. Good luck in your fantasy football matchups. Make some money on Underdog. If you, again, are not familiar with it, go sign up today. Use that promo code. Boom, right there. Fantasy Points, Fantasy PTS for that deposit matchup. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Stay tuned for the rest of these shows here today on Fantasy Points.
Peace.